So welcome to another unboxing video from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander, and today we're taking a look at a new game-ish from from GMT Games called The Battle of White Plains, Twilight of the New York Campaign, October 28th, 31st, 1776. So this is Volume 10 in the Battles of the American Revolution, or the Boar series. So B-O-A-R, you're going to hear me use the Boar system, just Battles of the American Revolution every so often. It's going to sort of a mouthful. So this game and the series itself, designed by Mark Mikolos. This is a big 3-inch box. So in this one, Battle of White Plains, you get that, but there's also 2 other scenarios in here. There's 2 big mounted maps, hence the giant board. But this is a series that we've played a couple of these in, and they're enjoyable, and this might seem like a big box and a big game, but really, the complexity is quite approachable. Like, it's not like, there's a lot crunchier games out there, which is always nice, where these games are a bit of a surprise. Don't be put off by these, is what I would say. So, inside the box, and this is chock-a-block, we've got the series rulebook. This is the most recent series rules. These were edited in June 2022, is when these came out. And this is things like stacking and movement regulations and commands and stuff like that. So you got good 14 pages of series rules, and then you have the exclusive rulebook for this particular box. And so this will have different scenario-specific bits and pieces, battle-specific bits and pieces, things to look at, because each of these battles and each of these titles have their own little special units and special kind of conditions and things that are going on. And so then we get into the actual setups and the scenarios that you've got in here as well. So really, outside of the scenarios, it's another maybe 10 pages of specific stuff. So it's 24 pages total, which for a war game isn't terrible. And then after this you get a lot of design notes and history and bits and pieces, if that's something that you're interested in reading. The design notes are always really good. A couple of pieces of errata for the exclusive rules, just some minor bits and pieces about rules clarifications. We have a bunch of play aids. And these are that's a bifold, right? A little pamphlet of these. And there's 2 of these, one for each player, that are identical. And then we have 2 counter sheets, but it's 1.5 counter sheets. And so that was something that I thought was really interesting. This box is huge, and there's a lot of stuff in this, but a big chunk of it are these 2 massive mounted map boards. There's a deck of cards and some dice that we'll get to. You know, one play aid a piece. And really, it's not a big counter density game. And that was something that I had experienced when we played, gosh, which one did we play? I can't remember if it wasn't Saratoga. Brandywine? I think we played Brandywine. And I was surprised at, like, what the maps and the battles look like with the units on the board. This is not like some big monster game with a ton of stacking. So just bear that in mind. I found that it was very approachable from that standpoint too. So here we have our British units, we have our colonial units, we got some Germans over here, Hessians. And a lot of them have a reverse side where it's like a broken side on those. Nice little leaders with their historical pictures on them. And then this one is a lot of administrative or kind of defensive unit counters and things like that. But extra movement points, rallies, different commands that you're going to issue. And there's a set for each of the players there as well. And those are all dual-sided as well. So let's look at these maps. If you've played any of the titles in this series, these maps will look quite familiar to you in their style and their artwork. And I do appreciate that they are consistent across the board. And once again, yeah, this is a 22 by 34 map. Here, it goes this way round. But a good chunk of the map down here is some holding boxes and some leader summary tables, and then there's a very big and detailed turn track up here. So really the map isn't that big. It's not as small as like a Combat Commander map, but when you look at this, it has, I don't know, I get a similar type of feel. You're going to have a bunch of units, but mostly there's very little stacking. A lot of times don't want to stack a ton of guys. And it's not this massive sprawling game that you're going to get lost in. They're these very focused battles on maps that aren't overly large, and you don't get like all this extraneous stuff that you've never actually used in a game just to fill up map space. So that's just something that I really like. And the maps are very clear as well. Like the terrain is all very easily delineated of what's what, and I appreciate that too. So this is the Battle of White Plains specifically, and these are not dual-sided like some of the other games by GMT can be in these big multi-packs. But here's the other map. Here. And this one tags on here. So you can play smaller kind of snippets or different situations of this, but when you put the two maps together, it does take up a significant portion of the table. But unlike many other games, there's not all extra like play aids and holding boxes. All of that's built into the map. So the table creep in this one is like just the maps and a deck of cards, which the deck of cards, I mean, these little decks of cards you can kind of stick anywhere on a table. So on this half of the map, we also have our strength points lost table. And in this game, when you lose a certain amount of strength points, you're going to lose the game. That's one of the kind of hallmarks of this series where, yeah, there's objectives and victory points and things like that, but if you take too much attrition and too many losses, you're going to lose that way. And so I like it where you got the dual kind of, not victory conditions, but the loss conditions where you can't just charge everyone in and everyone dies, but you somehow still win. In this, to me, it's a bit more realistic or historical, where it's like, hey, when you take a certain number of losses, you retreat. Like the kind of Pyrrhic victories where everyone dies, but one guy sits on the objective that you get in a lot of the gamey war games. It's much rarer in this series, which I appreciate. It's just an interesting, different focus on it as well. So that's a look at the two maps. You do get 2d8 and they're, or 2d10, sorry, and they're blue and red, corresponding to the colonial and the British colours, which we appreciate as well. The tactics cards, this is for the British side, and they have deck 1, deck 2, and deck 3 up here in the corners. Deck 1, deck 2, and deck 3. I presume that's for the different scenarios. Might say, hey, use these two decks, or and these say, you know, special abilities or rule-breaking things. You're going to, hey, do this cool thing outside of that. And then these are your different attacks and things that you can do that correspond to the tactics chits that we saw on the sheet earlier. And then we have the the colonial ones, I apologize. These nice in blue. And they have a nice little, I always like the historical paintings and pictures on them, so it's not just some text, but very clear, very clean cards, nothing too fancy on those. But this is a system that has been around for a very long time, all things considered. Anytime you're on volume 10, you're doing the right thing. And I know there's so much more coming out from this series as well. I think the plan is to get 13 titles, one for each of the colonies, the original colonies at least, during the American Revolutionary War. But then they're also going on to a system called Small Bore, Small Battles of the American Revolution, which is going to have, like, as you may well imagine, smaller format, small skirmishes, and they can do all sorts of things outside of the colonies, out in the Indian territories and further out west, and different things where maybe you couldn't fill a whole box, but you can get 3 or 4 or 5 of those into a small bore and put that out as a package. So that's also something that's very exciting, in different scales and things like that. That's also interesting. So this is the Battle of White Plains. We're going to play this one here coming up real soon. Again, a system that isn't super mega complicated and has been refined over 10 titles. And so the rules themselves are pretty clean. And there's just like neat things like your army morale and your loss points that you have to track, as well as trying to take objectives and, you know, geographically take ground and fulfill your victory points that way as well. So lots of things to consider, but nothing overwhelming if you've played a war game or two. So that was the Battle of White Plains from GMT Games. Check this out if this is something that you're interested in, and there's a lot more to come from this series, but you'll also see a review of this coming out soon as well. But appreciate you very much for tuning in. I've been Alexander for theplayersaid.com.